The rain came down in steady sheets that Tuesday morning, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the gray sky above. Officer Derek Chen had been on patrol for 3 hours already, and his mood matched the weather. He sat in his cruiser at the intersection of Maple and Fifth, sipping cold coffee from a thermos that had long since lost its warmth. That's when he saw it. A silver sedan rolled right through the red light, not even slowing down. Derek's jaw tightened. He hated when people thought the rules didn't apply to them. With a quick flip of the switch, his lights came on, painting the wet street in flashes of red and blue. The sedan pulled over almost immediately, which should have told Derek something. But he was already forming opinions as he grabbed his citation book and stepped out into the rain. He'd been a cop for 8 years, and he thought he could read people in seconds. Expensive car, nice neighborhood, probably someone who thought a badge and a smile would get them out of anything. He approached the driver's side window, rain dripping off the brim of his hat. The window rolled down to reveal a woman in her early 40s. She wore a charcoal blazer, and her dark hair was pulled back neatly. There was something calm about her, almost too calm, which immediately rubbed Derek the wrong way. "License and registration," he said, his tone already sharper than it needed to be. "Of course, officer," the woman replied, her voice steady and polite. She reached for her glove compartment slowly, keeping her hands visible, doing everything by the book. She handed over her documents without any fuss. Derek glanced at the license. Elena Rodriguez. He looked back at her, then at the documents again. "Do you know why I pulled you over, Miss Rodriguez?" "I believe I ran that red light back there," she said simply. No excuses, no dramatics, just a straightforward answer. For some reason, her honesty made Derek even more irritated. Maybe it was the long shift, maybe it was the rain seeping through his collar, or maybe it was something else entirely. Whatever it was, he felt the need to make a point. "You believe?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You don't believe anything. You absolutely ran that light. I saw the whole thing. You didn't even tap your brakes." Elena nodded slightly. "You're right. I apologize. I was distracted, and there's no excuse for that." But Derek wasn't done. He leaned down closer to the window, and his voice took on that particular tone that some officers use when they want to make someone feel small. "You know, I see people like you every single day. Nice car, nice clothes, probably on your way to some important meeting. And you all think the same thing, that the rules are for other people, that you can just do whatever you want because you've got places to be." Elena's expression didn't change. She simply looked at him with those steady, dark eyes. "I understand your frustration, officer. I made a mistake, and I take full responsibility for it." Her calm was infuriating to Derek. He wanted some kind of reaction, some sign that his words were getting through. "Do you understand that you could have caused an accident? That someone could have been hurt because you couldn't be bothered to stop at a red light?" "I do understand that," Elena said quietly, "and I'm grateful that didn't happen. I'll accept whatever citation you need to give me." Derek straightened up, rain running down his face. He started writing the ticket with more force than necessary, his pen digging into the paper. As he wrote, he continued his lecture. "People think police officers are just out here to ruin their day, but we're trying to keep everyone safe. And that means everyone has to follow the same rules. No matter who they think they are." Elena said nothing. She just waited patiently while the rain pattered against her windshield. Derek tore off the citation and thrust it through the window. "That's a $200 fine. Court date is on the bottom if you want to contest it, though I'll be there to testify, so I wouldn't waste your time if I were you." "Thank you, officer," Elena said, taking the ticket. She glanced at it briefly, then looked back up at him. "I hope you have a good rest of your day." Derek almost laughed at that. Here he was, giving her a lecture about responsibility and respect for the law, and she was wishing him a good day like they'd just had a pleasant chat. It felt like mockery, even though her tone was sincere. "Just slow down next time," he said, stepping back from the car, "and pay attention to what you're doing." "I will," Elena said. Then she rolled up her window, checked her mirrors carefully, and pulled back into traffic with her turn signal on, following every rule perfectly. Derek watched her drive away, that silver sedan disappearing into the sheets of rain. He felt a strange mix of satisfaction and annoyance. Satisfaction because he'd done his job, written the ticket, made his point. Annoyance because she'd been so composed, so unruffled by his words. Most people got angry or defensive or started making excuses. But not her. She just sat there taking it all, agreeing with him, and somehow that made him feel like he was the one being lectured. He walked back to his patrol car, shaking the rain off his jacket. As he settled back into the driver's seat, he tossed his citation book onto the passenger seat and picked up his radio to call in the stop. Just another routine traffic violation, he thought. Just another person who thought they were too important to stop at red lights. What Derek didn't know, couldn't have known in that moment, was that Elena had indeed been on her way to something important. Very important. And she was running late because of a meeting that had gone longer than expected. A meeting about courtroom procedures and new protocols for handling traffic violations. Because Elena Rodriguez wasn't just another driver in a nice car. She was a district court judge, and she'd been presiding over cases in that very courthouse for the past 6 years. But she hadn't mentioned that to Derek. She could have. Some people in her position might have pulled the "do you know who I am" card, might have tried to use their status to get out of a ticket. But Elena had never been that kind of person. She believed in the law, believed in accountability, and she believed that no one, not even a judge, was above the rules. If she ran a red light, she deserved a ticket. It was that simple. As Derek pulled back into traffic to continue his patrol, Elena was pulling into the courthouse parking lot. She sat in her car for a moment, looking at the ticket in her hand. She recognized the officer's name on it. Derek Chen. She'd seen him testify in her courtroom before. He was thorough, professional on the stand, and his cases were usually solid. But this interaction they'd just had, this wasn't professional. This was something else. Elena folded the ticket and placed it in her briefcase. She had court in 20 minutes. Whatever happened with this ticket, whatever came next, it would have to wait. Right now, she had a full docket to get through and justice to serve. She stepped out into the rain, pulled her blazer tight, and walked toward the courthouse steps, leaving the morning's encounter behind her, at least for now. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy morning, and Derek Chen had completely forgotten about the woman in the silver sedan. He'd written dozens of tickets since then, dealt with accidents, domestic disputes, and the usual chaos that came with being a police officer. One traffic stop blended into another, and Elena Rodriguez was just another name in his citation book. Today was different, though. Today Derek was heading to court, and he felt good about it. He was testifying in a DUI case, one he'd worked hard on. The arrest had been textbook perfect. He'd noticed the erratic driving, conducted the field sobriety test by the book, and the breathalyzer results were well over the legal limit. This was the kind of case that reminded him why he became a cop in the first place. Derek adjusted his dress uniform in the mirror before leaving his apartment. Every button polished, every crease sharp. He took pride in his appearance, especially in court. Juries and judges noticed these things. It showed respect for the process, respect for the law. And Derek did respect the law. At least he thought he did. The courthouse was busy when he arrived, filled with lawyers in suits, defendants looking nervous, and families waiting on wooden benches that had probably been there since the building was constructed. Derek walked through the metal detector with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before. The security guard nodded at him. Everyone knew Derek. He had a reputation as a solid officer, someone who did things right. He made his way to the 3rd floor where the courtroom was located. His case wasn't scheduled until 10:30, so he had about 40 minutes to kill. He found a spot on a bench in the hallway and pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages and emails. Other officers passed by, some stopping to chat. "Big case today?" asked Officer Williams, a veteran who'd been on the force for 20 years. "DUI from last month," Derek replied. "Should be straightforward." "Guy blew a .18. Williams whistled. "That's pretty clear cut. He'll be out of here before lunch." Derek nodded. He felt that same satisfaction he always felt before testifying in a solid case. This is what the job was about. Getting dangerous drivers off the road, keeping people safe. He thought back to that woman he'd lectured about running the red light. Maybe his words had gotten through to her. Maybe she was being more careful now. He liked to think his stern approach made a difference. At 10:15, the bailiff called out that the courtroom was open. Derek stood, straightened his uniform one more time and walked through the heavy wooden doors. The courtroom was exactly as he remembered it. Dark wood paneling, the state seal on the wall behind the judge's bench, rows of seats for observers. A few people were already seated, mostly lawyers shuffling through files and whispering to each other. Derek took his seat in the front row, right behind where the prosecutor would sit. He recognized the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Torres who he'd worked with on several cases. She gave him a quick nod and a smile. Everything was lining up perfectly. The defense attorney was there too, a younger guy who looked fresh out of law school. He was nervously organizing his papers, probably his first DUI case. Derek had seen it all before. The kid would try to poke holes in the arrest procedure, question the equipment, maybe suggest the defendant had some medical condition that affected the sobriety test. But Derek's report was airtight. He'd triple-checked everything. More people filed into the courtroom. The defendant arrived with his family, looking pale and worried. Good, Derek thought. People should be worried when they break the law. Maybe this would teach him not to get behind the wheel after drinking. 10:30 came and went. The judge still hadn't arrived. This wasn't unusual. Court rarely started exactly on time. Derek leaned back in his seat, relaxed. He went over his testimony in his head, making sure every detail was fresh. The time of the stop, the observations he'd made, the smell of alcohol, the slurred speech, the failed sobriety test, the breathalyzer reading. It was all there, burned into his memory. At 10:35, Derek noticed something odd. The bailiff kept glancing at him. Not just once, but several times. And there was something in that look, something Derek couldn't quite figure out. Was it concern? Amusement? He couldn't tell. He shifted in his seat, suddenly less comfortable than he'd been a moment ago. The prosecutor, Linda, was typing something on her phone. She glanced up at Derek, then quickly looked away. Now Derek was definitely feeling like something was off. He'd been in enough courtrooms to know when the atmosphere was strange, and this was strange. Everything okay? Derek whispered to Linda. She looked at him, and there was definitely something in her expression. Yeah, just, you'll see. What kind of answer was that? Derek felt a small knot forming in his stomach, though he couldn't say why. His case was solid. His testimony was ready. What could possibly be wrong? At 10:40, the bailiff stood up and moved to the side door that led to the judge's chambers. This was it. The judge was coming. Derek sat up straighter, his hands folded in his lap, the picture of professional respect. The bailiff's voice rang out, loud and formal. All rise for the Honorable Judge Elena Rodriguez. Derek stood automatically, the words not quite registering at first. Elena Rodriguez, that name. Why did that name sound familiar? He'd heard it before recently, but where? And then the door opened, and Elena walked in. The same Elena. The woman from the silver sedan. The woman he'd pulled over in the rain. The woman he'd lectured about thinking she was above the law. That Elena. But she wasn't wearing a blazer anymore. She was wearing black judicial robes, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd been doing this job for years. Because she had been. She'd been a judge while Derek was telling her about people like her who think the rules don't apply. Derek felt all the blood drain from his face. His mouth went dry. His hands, which had been steady and confident just moments ago, started to shake. He tried to swallow but couldn't. The confident officer who'd walked into this courtroom 20 minutes ago had vanished, replaced by someone who desperately wished he could disappear through the floor. Elena took her seat behind the bench with the same calm composure she'd shown in her car that rainy morning. She didn't look at Derek right away. She was organizing papers, settling in, doing what judges do before starting a session. But Derek couldn't look away from her. He was frozen, standing there with everyone else, his mind racing through every word he'd said to her, every condescending remark, every assumption he'd made. "Please be seated," Elena said, her voice clear and authoritative. Everyone sat down. Derek practically fell into his chair. The young defense attorney noticed and gave him a curious look. Even the defendant glanced over, probably wondering why the police officer suddenly looked like he was the one on trial. Linda, the prosecutor, leaned over slightly. "You okay, Derek? You look like you've seen a ghost." He had seen a ghost. The ghost of his own arrogance, his own assumptions, his own big mouth. That woman he'd treated like just another entitled driver who thought she was too important to follow the rules. She was the judge. She'd been the judge the whole time, and he'd had no idea. Elena finally looked up from her papers. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, professional and detached. When her gaze landed on Derek, it lingered for just a moment. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for Derek to see it. She recognized him, of course she did. How could she not? But her expression gave nothing away. No anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. Just that same calm that had frustrated Derek so much during the traffic stop, the same calm that now terrified him. "Good morning," Elena said to the courtroom. "We have several matters on the docket today. Let's begin with case number 2024 TR 5847, State versus Robert Mitchell, DUI charge." That was Derek's case, the one he'd been so confident about, the one that was supposed to be straightforward, the one where he was supposed to waltz in, give his testimony, and walk out feeling good about his work. Now, sitting in that courtroom, watching Elena open the case file, Derek wasn't sure about anything anymore, except one thing. This was going to be a very long morning. Derek's heart was pounding so loud he was sure everyone in the courtroom could hear it. He watched Elena flip through the case file with the same careful attention she probably gave to every case that crossed her bench. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't glancing at him with knowing looks. She was simply doing her job, which somehow made everything worse. The defendant, Robert Mitchell, sat at the defense table looking nervous. His attorney kept whispering to him, probably last-minute advice about how to behave. Robert's wife was in the gallery clutching a tissue. It was a scene Derek had witnessed dozens of times before, but today everything felt different. Today he was the one who felt like he was under scrutiny. Elena finished reading the initial documents and looked up. The defendant is charged with driving under the influence on the night of September 15th. "Is the state ready to proceed?" Linda Torres, the prosecutor, stood up smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor, the state calls Officer Derek Chen to the stand." This was it. Derek's legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds as he stood up. He walked to the witness stand, his polished shoes clicking against the floor in the quiet courtroom. Every step felt like it took forever. When he finally reached the stand, the bailiff held out a Bible. "Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand," the bailiff said. Derek did as instructed, though his hand was shaking slightly. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," Derek said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat and sat down in the witness chair. For the first time in his career, he felt genuinely nervous on the stand. Elena was watching him now, her expression neutral and professional. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," she said. "Derek Chen. I'm a police officer with the City Police Department. Badge number 4782. "Thank you, Officer Chen. You may proceed, Counselor." Linda approached with a reassuring smile, probably thinking Derek was just having a bad morning, if only she knew. "Officer Chen, can you tell us about the events of September 15th, specifically your encounter with the defendant, Robert Mitchell?" Derek took a breath and began his testimony. He'd given this same type of testimony hundreds of times. The facts were simple. He'd been on patrol around 11 p.m. when he noticed a vehicle swerving between lanes on Highway 9. The car had drifted onto the shoulder twice. Derek had activated his lights and pulled the vehicle over. As he spoke, his confidence started to return slightly. This was familiar territory. He knew this case inside and out. He described approaching the vehicle, noticing the smell of alcohol, observing Robert's bloodshot eyes and slurred speech. He explained how he'd conducted the field sobriety tests, how Robert had failed to walk a straight line, how he'd swayed during the one-leg stand. But every few sentences, Derek found his eyes drifting to Elena. She was taking notes, her face unreadable. Was she listening more carefully to him than she normally would? Was she looking for mistakes in his testimony? Or was she just doing what she always did, being thorough and fair? "And what was the result of the breathalyzer test?" Linda asked. "0.18, Derek answered, more than twice the legal limit. "Thank you, Officer Chen. No further questions, Your Honor." Derek started to relax. His testimony had gone well. The facts were the facts. But then the defense attorney stood up, and Derek remembered that the hardest part was just beginning. Cross-examination. The young attorney's name was Kevin Park, and he looked even more nervous than Derek felt. But nervous lawyers could be unpredictable, and unpredictable meant dangerous. "Officer Chen," Kevin began, adjusting his glasses. "You testify that you smelled alcohol when you approached Mr. Mitchell's vehicle, correct?" "That's correct." "And this was at 11 p.m. on a Friday night?" "Yes." "On a highway that runs right past 3 popular restaurants and 2 bars?" Derek saw where this was going. "Yes, but the smell was coming from inside the vehicle." "You're certain of that? On a busy Friday night with other cars passing by, windows open, You're absolutely certain the smell was specifically from inside my client's car? Yes, I am. Kevin nodded slowly. Let's talk about the field sobriety tests. You had Mr. Mitchell perform these tests on the shoulder of the highway, is that right? Yes. At night? Yes. With cars passing by at highway speeds? Derek felt a small bead of sweat forming on his forehead. That's where the traffic stop occurred, yes. Officer Chen, have you ever tried to walk a perfectly straight line on the side of a highway at night with semi-trucks blowing past you at 60 miles an hour? Objection, Linda said, standing up. Argumentative. Elena's voice cut through smoothly. Sustained. Counselor, please rephrase. Kevin nodded. Officer Chen, isn't it true that the conditions under which you conducted these tests, the uneven shoulder, the darkness, the wind from passing vehicles could affect anyone's balance, not just someone who's been drinking? The tests are designed to be conducted in field conditions, Derek said. But his voice lacked its usual certainty. But not ideal conditions, Kevin pressed. No, not ideal. Elena was still taking notes. Derek couldn't tell if he was hurting his case or not. He'd never felt this unsure on the stand before. Kevin moved on to the breathalyzer. Now, regarding the breathalyzer test, when was the device last calibrated? Derek had to think. He knew this information. He'd checked it before the trial, 2 weeks before the test was administered. And how often is calibration required? Every 30 days. So it was within the acceptable time frame? Yes, barely, Kevin said. By 2 weeks. Objection, Linda said. Is there a question? Withdrawn, Kevin said quickly. He walked back to his table, flipped through some papers, then turned back to Derek. Officer Chen, in your 8 years on the force, how many DUI arrests have you made? I don't have an exact number. Approximately? Maybe 100, maybe more. That's quite a lot. Would you say you've gotten good at spotting drunk drivers? Derek sensed a trap but couldn't see it. I'd say I know what to look for, yes? So when you pulled over Mr. Mitchell, you already suspected he was drunk before you even spoke to him. I suspected impairment based on his driving, which means you were already looking for signs of intoxication when you approached the vehicle. Looking specifically for things that would confirm what you already believed to be true. I was conducting a proper traffic stop, Derek said, his frustration starting to show. Elena's voice broke in. Counselor, is there a specific question about the officer's procedures? Your Honor, I'm establishing the officer's state of mind during the stop. Kevin said. Then please do so more directly, Elena replied. Her tone firm but fair. Kevin nodded and shifted his approach. Officer Chen, did you consider any other explanation for Mr. Mitchell's behavior? Medical conditions, fatigue, medication? I asked if he had any medical conditions. He said no. And you believed him? A man you thought was intoxicated, you took his word about his medical history? Derek's jaw tightened. I conducted the tests appropriately. Did you call for medical personnel? No, because it wasn't necessary. But you're not a doctor, are you, Officer Chen? No, but I'm trained to recognize impairment. Kevin let that hang in the air for a moment, then said, no further questions. Derek stepped down from the witness stand, his uniform feeling tight around his collar. He'd been in tougher cross-examinations before, but today everything felt harder, sharper. He returned to his seat and Linda gave him a small nod. She didn't seem worried. The case was still solid, but Derek couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Elena had watched his entire testimony without any visible reaction. She'd ruled fairly on the objections, hadn't shown any favoritism or bias. She was being professional, completely professional, and somehow that made Derek even more uncomfortable. Because he knew what was coming. He'd seen the court docket on the board outside. After this DUI case, there were several traffic violations scheduled. Small cases, quick hearings, the kind of thing that got handled in a few minutes each. Including case number 2024 TR6633, his citation, his ticket, the one he'd written to Elena Rodriguez 3 weeks ago while lecturing her about people who think they're above the law. Elena closed the DUI case file and looked at both attorneys. I'll take this matter under advisement and issue a ruling by the end of the week. We'll take a 10-minute recess before proceeding with the traffic docket. She stood, and everyone in the courtroom stood with her. She disappeared through the door to her chambers, leaving Derek sitting there with the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on him like a physical thing. 10 minutes. He had 10 minutes before facing the consequences of his own behavior. 10 minutes before the woman he'd treated with such disrespect would decide what to do about it. 10 minutes to think about every word he'd said, every assumption he'd made, every bit of attitude he'd given her. And Derek had never felt 10 minutes pass so slowly in his entire life. Those 10 minutes felt like 10 hours. Derek sat in the courtroom watching the clock on the wall tick forward with agonizing slowness. Other people filtered in and out during the recess. Some left, their cases done for the day. Others arrived, clutching traffic tickets and looking anxious about their court appearances. Derek envied them. They had no idea how good they had it. Linda had left to make some phone calls. The defense attorney was talking quietly with Robert Mitchell and his wife in the hallway. Derek was alone with his thoughts, and his thoughts were not kind. He kept replaying that morning in the rain, hearing his own voice in his head. The condescension, the assumptions, the lecture about people who think they're above the law. He'd meant every word at the time. He'd felt righteous, justified, like he was teaching an important lesson. Now those same words felt like stones in his stomach. The bailiff returned first, then Linda, then the others. People took their seats. The low murmur of conversation filled the courtroom. Derek watched the door to the judge's chambers, dreading the moment it would open. When it finally did, Elena walked out with the same composed dignity she'd shown all morning. Everyone stood. She took her seat. Everyone sat. The routine was so familiar, so normal, that it made the situation feel even more surreal. "We'll now proceed with the traffic docket," Elena announced. Her eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Derek before moving on. Case number 2024 TR 6633, City versus Elena Rodriguez. There it was, out loud. Official. Derek felt his face flush hot. Several people in the courtroom looked around, confused. The name on the case was the same as the judge's name. How could the judge be the defendant in her own courtroom? Elena seemed to expect this confusion. "For the record," she said calmly, "I am the defendant in this case. The citation was issued to me by Officer Chen, who was present in the courtroom. Given the unusual circumstances, I want to be completely transparent about how we'll proceed." She looked directly at Derek now. "Officer Chen, please approach the bench." Derek stood on shaky legs. He walked forward, very aware that every eye in the courtroom was on him. When he reached the bench, Elena gestured to a spot where they could speak quietly, though the court reporter was still recording everything. "Officer Chen," Elena said, her voice low but clear, "I want you to know that I've reviewed the citation you issued me. The facts are not in dispute. I did run that red light. However, there's another matter we need to address." Derek swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. After the stop, I submitted a request to the police department for your dashboard camera footage from that morning. Standard procedure for any citation I receive, to ensure everything is documented properly. I've reviewed that footage." She paused, letting that sink in. "Would you like to review it as well before we proceed?" Derek's mouth was dry as sand. I remember the stop, Your Honor. I'm sure you do. But I think it would be beneficial for the record if we watched it together. Bailiff, please set up the playback." The bailiff wheeled over a TV and laptop setup that was used for presenting evidence. Derek wanted to object, to say it wasn't necessary, but he knew he had no ground to stand on. If Elena wanted to show the footage, she had every right to. The screen flickered to life, showing the view from Derek's patrol car. There was the intersection, the rain, the red light. The silver sedan rolled through without stopping. Derek's voice came through the speakers as he called in the stop. So far, everything was routine. Then came the approach to the vehicle. The window rolling down, Elena's calm face appearing, and then Derek's voice, hard and sharp. "License and registration." The courtroom listened as the entire conversation played out. Every word Derek had said was crystal clear. The sarcasm when she said she believed she'd run the light. The long lecture about people like her. The assumption that she thought she was too important to follow rules. His tone dripping with judgment and superiority. Elena's responses were equally clear, polite, apologetic, taking full responsibility. Not making excuses, accepting the citation without complaint. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Derek couldn't look at anyone. He stared at the floor, his face burning with shame. Elena spoke quietly, but her voice carried. "Officer Chen, would you say that interaction represented your best professional conduct?" Derek forced himself to look at her. No, Your Honor. Would you speak to any other citizen that way during a routine traffic stop? He wanted to say no. He wanted to say it was a one-time thing, a bad morning, that he was usually better than this. But he couldn't lie under oath, not here, not now. Sometimes I get frustrated with drivers who I think aren't taking safety seriously. So you lecture them? Make assumptions about their character? Use your position of authority to make them feel small? Each question hit like a punch. Your Honor, I was trying to emphasize the seriousness of the violation. By being disrespectful? Derek had no answer for that. Elena leaned back in her chair. Officer Chen, do you know how many traffic stops I've been involved in as a judge? How many cases I've reviewed where officers conducted themselves professionally, even when faced with hostile or difficult drivers? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Do you know what the difference is between a good officer and a poor one? Derek shook his head slightly. Respect, Elena said simply. Good officers understand that everyone they encounter, regardless of what they've done, deserves basic human dignity. They can be firm without being cruel. They can enforce the law without talking down to people. You weren't being professional that morning, Officer Chen. You were being a bully. The word stung because it was true. Derek had been a bully. He'd used his badge and his authority to make himself feel superior, to put someone else in their place. And he'd done it to a woman who'd been nothing but polite and cooperative. Your Honor, Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. I apologize. What I did was wrong. You're apologizing now because you know who I am, Elena said, not unkindly but firmly. But what about all the other people you've treated that way? The ones who aren't judges? The ones who had no power to hold you accountable? Do they deserve an apology too? Derek felt something crack inside him. She was right. How many times had he done this? How many people had he treated with that same condescension, that same arrogance? He'd told himself he was being tough, being effective, making a difference. But really he'd just been making people feel bad. Yes, he said quietly. They do. Elena nodded slowly. She looked at the citation in front of her, then back at Derek. Here's what's going to happen. This traffic citation against me is valid. I broke the law, I deserve the ticket. However, the way you conducted yourself during that stop was unacceptable, so I'm going to make a decision that I think serves justice. She picked up a pen and wrote something on a document. I'm dismissing this citation, not because I didn't commit the violation, but because your conduct during the stop was so far below professional standards that it tainted the entire interaction. However, she held up a hand as Derek started to react. I'm also filing a formal complaint with your department about your behavior during this stop, and recommending mandatory additional training on professional conduct and community relations. Derek nodded. It was fair. More than fair, actually. She could have done much worse. Furthermore, Elena continued, I'm requiring you to remain in this courtroom for the rest of today's traffic docket. I want you to see how these cases should be handled. I want you to watch how I treat people who come before this court. People who have broken the law, people who may be making mistakes. Because that's what most of them are, Officer Chen. People making mistakes. They're not enemies. They're not beneath you. They're citizens who deserve your respect, even when you're holding them accountable. Yes, Your Honor, Derek said. Thank you. Don't thank me, Elena replied. Just do better, be better. That's all any of us can do. She dismissed him back to his seat. Derek returned to the gallery and Elena called the next case. It was a teenager who'd been caught speeding, his mother sitting beside him looking worried. Elena listened to the boy's explanation about being late for work, asked him a few questions about his driving record, and then reduced his fine since it was his first offense. She was firm but kind, making it clear that actions have consequences while also recognizing that people deserve a chance to learn from their mistakes. Derek watched, and with each case he felt the weight of his own behavior more heavily. Elena wasn't being soft. She was being just. There was a difference, and Derek was finally starting to understand it. The docket continued through the afternoon. An elderly woman who'd turned the wrong way down a one-way street. A man who'd forgotten to renew his registration. A college student with an expired license. Elena treated each person with the same respect and attention. She listened. She asked questions. She made fair decisions. And Derek sat there learning a lesson that no police academy had ever taught him. A lesson about humility, about respect, about the difference between authority and power. He'd come into this courthouse that morning thinking he was one of the good guys, doing important work, keeping people in line. Now he realized he'd been doing something else entirely, and if he wanted to be the kind of officer he'd always thought he was, he had a lot of work to do. The courthouse clock showed 4:30 when Elena finally finished the last case on her docket. Derek had sat through all of it, watching her handle each person who came before her with the same careful attention. Some cases she ruled in favor of the city, some she dismissed, some she reduced. But in every single one, she treated the person standing before her like they mattered. It was such a simple thing, treating people with respect. But Derek was starting to realize how rarely he actually did it, how often he'd let his badge become a shield for his own ego, his own need to feel important and in control. "Officer Chen," Elena said, as people started filing out of the courtroom. "Please remain for a moment." Derek's heart sank. He thought they were done. Apparently not. He stayed in his seat while the courtroom emptied. The bailiff lingered near the door but gave them space. Finally, it was just Derek and Elena in the large, quiet room. Elena came down from the bench and sat in one of the gallery seats a few feet away from Derek. Without the robes and the elevated position, she looked more human somehow. Tired even. It had been a long day for both of them. "I want to tell you something," Elena said, her voice softer now that they weren't on the record, "something I don't talk about very often." Derek nodded, not trusting himself to speak. 20 years ago, I was a public defender, fresh out of law school, full of idealism about justice and fairness. I had a client, a young man named Antonio, 19 years old. He'd been pulled over for a broken taillight. Nothing major. But during the stop, the officer decided Antonio was being disrespectful. The truth is, Antonio was scared and nervous, and when people are scared, sometimes they come across wrong. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. That officer turned a simple traffic stop into an arrest for resisting, even though Antonio never laid a hand on him. Never even raised his voice. The officer just didn't like his attitude, didn't like being questioned. And because that officer let his ego get in the way of his judgment, Antonio ended up with a criminal record that followed him for years. He lost a scholarship, lost his chance at college. His whole life trajectory changed because one officer couldn't handle someone not showing him enough respect. Derek felt sick. He saw himself in that story, saw all the times he'd let his pride dictate his actions. "I'm not saying you're that officer," Elena continued, looking at him directly now. "I don't know you well enough to make that judgment. But I saw shades of that behavior in how you treated me, and if you're doing it to a middle-aged woman in a nice car, I have to wonder who else you're doing it to. The young black men? The Hispanic teenagers? The people who don't speak English as their first language? The ones who have every reason to be scared when they see police lights behind them?" "Your Honor, I've never," Derek started but stopped. Had he never? Was he sure about that? How many traffic stops had he conducted where he'd made snap judgments based on how someone looked, how they talked, what neighborhood they were driving through? "I want to believe you're a good cop," Elena said. "The prosecution team speaks highly of you. Your arrest records are thorough. Your testimony is usually solid. But being good at the technical parts of the job isn't enough. You have to be good at the human parts too, and that's the part you're failing at." The words hurt because they were true. Derek had always prided himself on being a good cop. High arrest rates, low complaints, commendations from supervisors. But he'd never stopped to think about the people on the other side of those interactions. The people who walked away from encounters with him feeling smaller, less than disrespected. "What do I do?" Derek asked quietly. "How do I fix this?" Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. "You start by recognizing that every person you encounter is having the worst day of their week, maybe their month. Nobody wants to get pulled over. Nobody wants to get a ticket. They're already feeling bad about whatever they did. Your job isn't to make them feel worse. Your job is to enforce the law fairly while treating them like human beings." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. "I dismissed that ticket today not as a favor to myself, but as a lesson to you. Every traffic stop you conduct should be done with the same professionalism, regardless of who's behind the wheel. Whether it's a judge or a janitor, a doctor or a dishwasher, a CEO or a cashier, everyone deserves the same level of respect and dignity." Derek stood as well. "I understand, Your Honor, and I meant what I said earlier. I am sorry. Not just because you're a judge, but because I was wrong. I was wrong in how I treated you, and I've been wrong a lot of other times too." "Then change," Elena said simply. That's all you can do now. Change how you approach your job. Change how you talk to people. Change how you think about the badge you wear. It's not a license to talk down to people. It's a responsibility to serve them, even when you're holding them accountable. She walked back toward the bench to gather her things. Derek watched her. This woman who could have destroyed his career today if she'd wanted to. She had every right to be vindictive, to make an example of him, to let her anger show. Instead, she'd chosen to teach him something. Your Honor, Derek said as she was about to leave through the door to her chambers. She turned back. Yes? Why did you give me a second chance? You could have done a lot worse than just a complaint and training requirement. Elena smiled just a little. Because about 15 years ago I made a mistake in court. I was sharp with a witness who was having trouble explaining something. Made them feel stupid for not understanding legal terminology. After the case, the presiding judge pulled me aside and gave me some advice. He said that the law is intimidating enough without lawyers and judges making it worse. He said our job is to seek justice, not to make ourselves feel superior. She adjusted the files in her arms. That judge gave me grace when I didn't deserve it. He taught me to be better instead of just punishing me for being imperfect. So I'm extending that same grace to you. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Derek promised. I'll do better. See that you do. Because next time, if there is a next time, there won't be a second chance. I'll make sure of that. She disappeared through the door, leaving Derek alone in the empty courtroom. He stood there for a long moment, letting everything sink in. Then he walked out into the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the late afternoon sunlight. His patrol car was parked in the lot. He got in but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat there, thinking about the person he'd been when he woke up this morning and the person he was now. They felt like different people. His radio crackled. Unit 47, this is dispatch. We have a traffic incident at 5th and Market. Are you available? Derek picked up the radio. Unit 47, copy that. I'm en route. He started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. As he drove toward the call, he thought about what was waiting for him. Another traffic stop, probably. Another person having a bad day. Another chance to either be the kind of cop he'd always been, or the kind of cop he wanted to become. When he arrived at the intersection, there was a fender bender. 2 cars, minor damage, no injuries. A young woman was standing next to one car crying. She was maybe 22, 23 years old. Her first accident, probably. She looked terrified. The old Derek would have walked up with his citation book already out, would have asked for her license with that hard edge in his voice, would have made her feel even worse than she already did. But Derek took a breath and remembered Elena's words. Everyone deserves the same level of respect and dignity. He approached the young woman with his hands visible, his posture relaxed. Hi there, he said, his voice calm and gentle. I know this is stressful, but everything's going to be okay. Let's just take this step by step and we'll get it all sorted out. Is anyone hurt? The woman shook her head, wiping her eyes. No, I'm so sorry. I didn't see them until it was too late and I don't know what to do. I've never been in an accident before. That's all right, Derek said. Most people haven't. We'll walk through it together. First thing, let's make sure everyone's safe, then we'll exchange information and file a report. It's going to be fine. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you. Thank you for being so nice about this. Derek felt something shift inside him. This is what it was supposed to feel like. Helping people, even when they'd made mistakes, serving the community, not lording over it, making things better instead of worse. As he worked through the accident report, carefully explaining each step to both drivers, treating them both with patience and respect, Derek realized something. He'd learned more in this one day than in his entire 8 years on the force, and it had taken being humbled, being called out, being forced to look at himself honestly to finally understand what it meant to be a good cop. The sun was setting by the time he finished the report. He got back in his patrol car and continued his shift. There would be more traffic stops, more accidents, more interactions with people who were scared or angry or defensive. But Derek knew now that he had a choice in how he handled each one. He could be the officer who made people feel small, or he could be the officer who treated everyone with the dignity they deserved. He could use his badge as a weapon, or he could use it as a tool for making his community better. Elena Rodriguez had given him a second chance. But more than that, she'd given him a mirror to see himself clearly for the first time. What Derek chose to do with that reflection was up to him. He chose to be better. And that choice, that simple decision to treat people the way they deserve to be treated, made all the difference.